So welcome back to our fourth episode this week. If you're just now tuning in, this week in honor of Brain Awareness Week hosted by the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, we are releasing an episode each day with a guest.
We will be interviewing someone on a specific topic within neuroscience. On our fourth episode, we have Dr. Matthew Cooper with us today.
Welcome. So tell us a bit about yourself and what you're studying, and in terms of what you're researching and where your interests lie.
Sure. My name is Matt Cooper. I'm an assistant, or rather associate professor in the psychology department. I'm also assistant director of the Neuroscience program. I teach classes in drugs and behavior and pharmacology. My lab with graduate students and undergraduates, we study animal models of social stress to better understand stress-related mental illness.
Awesome. Okay, so what exactly is behavioral neuroscience?
Well, broadly, it is the study of the neural mechanisms that control a wide swath of behavior. So that behavior could be very broad. It could be learning and memory, could be sleeping, feeding, emotions. A wide swath of behavior across the animal kingdom and focusing on brain mechanisms.
Nice. So you mentioned that your lab focuses specifically on stress. So could you just tell a little bit about just like the relationships between stress and social relationships?
Yeah, right. Good question, because social stress is really the most common kind of stress that we modern humans experience. We don't, at least most of us are not experiencing temperature and nutritional stress, but we still experience a lot of stress, and it's usually in the form of social relationships. So that can take the form of severe social stress like aggression and violence. It can just be more mild forms of social conflict that are pretty stressful. Bullying can be very stressful.
Right.
So there's a whole lot, at least with humans, of stress that's related to social relationships. And so we try to study that in animals, because in animals there are a lot of different kinds of stressors in animals as well. But social stressors are very profound in animals. They initiate a large increase in stress hormones like cortisol. So we try to emphasize social stress in our animal models to better translate to humans.
Okay.
Awesome.
Whenever you say social stress, could you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, broadly defined, it's where another individual is the source of the stress. So it doesn't have, aggression is a classic example where individual number one is being aggressive to individual number two, and the recipient of aggression is very stressed, absolutely. But it doesn't have to be physical or overt aggression. Like I said, it could be status conflict and social conflict, or it could be social stress could in people come in the forms of poverty. Poverty can be a social stressor. So whenever that stressor is really brought about because of another individual, it really falls in the category of social stress.
Okay, awesome. So what piqued your interest in specifically researching stress in behavioral neuroscience?
Piqued my interest. I guess I would have to go back to my undergraduate experience. When I was in college, there was a primate lab that studied baboons and macaques, and I thought they were super cool, and so I wanted to get involved and be an undergraduate research assistant in the monkey lab. And when you start watching monkeys, you pretty quickly realize that the dominant animals are pretty mean to the subordinate animals. And then it doesn't take long to realize that the subordinate animals are very stressed under a lot of different conditions. And so I was particularly interested going forward about how do these subordinate animals cope with stress? They don't leave the group, they value the group, but how do they cope with the stress of being the subordinate animal? So from there, I went on to graduate school where I studied more about dominance relationships in monkeys. After that, I did postdoc to better understand neural mechanisms and used rodent models to study aggression and social stress in rodents so I could better understand the brain mechanisms.
Okay. So in your research with stress, what particular areas of the brain are you looking at?
Yeah, we have focused on a couple. The amygdala is an important brain region for stress research. It's important in terms of aggression, and it's also important for stress, and is very active in both of those situations. So in our animals that are stressed, their amygdala is very active. But what we're really then interested in is how animals cope with stress, and so that turns our attention to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex controls and inhibits and puts the brakes on the amygdala, and so animals and people that cope better with stress have a more active prefrontal cortex that can put the brakes on the amygdala. So we look at that interaction between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, and then beyond that, we look at how neurotransmitters like serotonin can tweak the whole system.
Right.
Nice. All right, so aside from the research that your lab is focusing on, do you know what are some other like big aspects of stress research and relationships? Like what are some other topics within that area is being studied right now?
Well, within stress research, one big area is stress-related mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that stress is a risk factor for major depression. It's a risk factor certainly for PTSD. And we know that early life stressors can be risk factors for all kinds of conditions as people get older. So there's been a big focus on what are the mechanisms related to stress-related changes in the brain that can promote or put somebody on a path towards mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of that coin is what are the mechanisms that help prevent that from happening?
Right.
How do people and animals cope with stress? Why are some individuals more resilient to stress? So you can look at it on either side of the coin about stress vulnerability or resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So why should UT students and other college students be interested in this topic or area of research?
I would expand beyond mental illness there. Certainly that is a big aspect to stress, but I think it's important for people that experience stress in other ways, whether it's stress of studying for exams or stress of social relationships with your circle of friends,
Mm-hmm.
that stress coping strategies can be learned, right? That maybe some people start off better at coping with stress than others, but for everybody they can get better at it.
Mm-hmm.
And those coping strategies have neuronal mechanisms, and they can be learned and changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so just for people to understand that they can become better copers with stress, and that that will change the brain and help them function better, whether it's on exams or social relationships or in any other aspect of their life.
So if an individual does have trouble coping with stress initially, it's not like an end all be all. There is hope for them to better cope with that in the future.
Absolutely. It doesn't mean that the stressor is going to lead to a clinical mental illness, but it may impair some aspect of function that they wish they could do better with, and they can certainly become better with improved coping strategies. And it's not the end of the world. They can get better at it.
Right. That's good. Yep. So what are some, coping strategies that are most popular for people who undergo a lot of who just deal with a lot of stressful environments?
Yeah, good question. Some of these are fairly well known, like exercise. It's still very important. It helps the brain. It can help people cope with stress.
I don't think many people want to hear that.
Yeah, right. But it's been shown in people and in a bunch of different animal models about the neuromechanisms of how exercise really promotes stress resistance. There are other things that can be done that are less physically taxing than exercise. Things like mindfulness and meditation can be really good for enhancing coping abilities and having people reduce their overall levels of stress. So that can be part. So even diet can help improve your ability to cope with stress. So and then I think another one we can keep adding things is social buffering. So it's important to have a good whether your circle of friends or family or whoever that you're close with is there to help and support you in those difficult times,
Mm-hmm.
really helps buffer the effects of stress. Mindfulness and meditation has been shown to specifically activate parts of the brain that we look at in our rodents, which is the prefrontal cortex, and it really helps when you activate that brain region. You can inhibit some other brain regions like the amygdala, and that there's been a great series of studies in the University of Wisconsin with Tibetan monks and how they meditate in a scanner to understand what are the brain regions that are important. Now, you don't have to be a enlightened monk to achieve some benefit from mindfulness and meditation. So there's certainly a degree, and there's a wide area for benefit there.
Amazing.
That's really cool. I feel like that is like a very untapped resource for stress resiliency, for like a coping mechanism. So that's definitely like an area that I'm also interested in too.
Because like I'm sure when you were going through the list of like possible coping strategies, like they were hitting on ones I've heard of, like the exercise, the having a good foundation, a good group around you, and also like sleep being important.
Sleep's another one.
But mindfulness and meditation, kind of how it's being brought to the public more, not just this like guru kind of thing, I guess, that I associate with mindfulness and meditation. So like bringing it to regular everyday people. I just think it's interesting. Anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if someone were to go into the field of behavioral neuroscience, what kind of qualifications would they have to pursue, and what type of laboratory experience should they seek out?
I think the important thing is just to get involved. So if the person is an undergraduate, I would say just get involved in research, whether that is contacting faculty during the semester, or maybe volunteering in the summer, or as a postbac kind of internship to do after they graduate. Whatever stage people are in, it's important to just get involved in whether it's paid or volunteer work. Then pursuing it, yes, to stay within the field of behavioral neuroscience will take some level of graduate training, and it kind of depends on where people want to go with that. A lot of people stay in the realm of academia and then move on to master's and PhD graduate programs. There's certainly room within healthcare and hospital settings to stay within the brain and behavior kind of field, or an industry in pharmaceutical industries or biotech industry is another area where people can stay in that kind of brain and health related space. But usually it starts with some graduate training as a master's or a PhD program. Yeah.
Right, so it doesn't only lead to like academia and research, they can go like multiple different pathways.
Right, that's a good point, is that no, it doesn't have to lead to university professor sort of academic trajectory, because there are a lot of, within broad healthcare settings, a lot of possibilities there within healthcare settings, hospitals, like I said, pharmaceutical companies, biotechs. And then of course academia is still there as well. But so that people don't have to, and you don't have to know when you start exactly what you want to specialize in and what you want to do. It's just important just to get involved.
Okay. Awesome. I did have one extra question that kind of goes on with your drugs and behavior class. So you did mention if people want to get involved with behavioral neuroscience, they have like the pharmacology route, right? So like what are some of the things that you cover in your drugs and behavior class that could speak to that pharmacology side of behavioral neuroscience?
Well, there are maybe sort of two separate aims, and we cover them both in the class. One is drug addiction. Right, so then there is, and that includes nicotine, alcohol, heroin, marijuana, LSD, the whole gamut of drugs. And so the mechanisms related to drug addiction, and then treatment for drug addiction. That's one huge area in terms of pharmacology. Another one is development of psychotropic medication. So kind of separate from drug addiction, we also cover antidepressants, antipsychotics, anxiolytic drugs, drugs for ADHD, autism. So there's another whole class of pharmaceuticals. And so in the class we take both of those approaches, and we talk about both kind of types of pharmacological approaches.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
So our last thing would be just, is there any group or event on campus or in the Knoxville community that you would want to plug for towards the very end?
Yeah, I would have to give a plug for the Brain Awareness campaign. Brain Awareness has been going on at UT for almost 10 years, and it's gotten bigger and bigger. It started out as a week, and then we called it Brain Awareness Week, and it was the week after spring break, and that's still the case. We still have Brain Awareness Week the week after spring break. But this year, it's gotten so big it doesn't really hold itself to just that week, so we have the whole month of March, and we're calling it the Brain Awareness campaign. There are about 10 separate student organizations on campus that are all contributing, and so I would just direct people to the website, and if you just look for UTK Brain Awareness Campaign, you'll see a whole calendar, see the March calendar of events. There's something almost every day, whether it's a panel discussion, a workshop, a seminar, a trivia night, something that, and there's something on mindfulness and meditation. You'll have to go.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. All right, so that concludes our 4th episode for the Brain Awareness Campaign, and a big thank you to Dr. Matthew Cooper for coming and talking about this with us.
All right, so if you're interested in learning more about the Brain Awareness Campaign, be sure to visit the website brainawareness.utk.edu for all the details. And thank you for tuning in.